Welcome back to Shadow Fear. Tonight we're taking a drive deep into Arizona's forgotten towns, but before we go any further, I need to warn you, what you're about to hear isn't easy to forget. These stories aren't legends. They're real events involving real people, and most of them were wiped from every public record. Someone wanted them erased. Entire towns that disappeared overnight. Emergency calls that went out. But when rescuers arrived, no one was there. Abandoned cars scattered across the desert. Doors left open, engines still running, and no sign of the drivers who left them behind. The few who made it out. They don't talk about it anymore. Some moved across states. Some still keep their lights on through the night, because they know whatever happened out there isn't over. And here's the thing. These stories aren't from decades ago. They happened within the last 2 years. Recent enough that the case files are still classified. Recent enough that you could drive to these places yourself. If you dare. If you're new to Shadow Fear, hit subscribe now, because here, we bring you the stories that were never meant to be told. Turn off your lights. Lock your doors. Because what's waiting out there in the desert will change the way you see everything. Let's begin with story 1. My name's Mike, and for most of my life I've been on the road. I'm not a trucker, not a delivery man. Not one of those drifters who live out of their cars, though I guess to most people I might have looked that way. I travel for work. Maintenance, mostly. Small electrical systems for gas stations and motels scattered across the Southwest. If you've ever pulled into a dimly lit place at 2 a.m. to fill up your tank, and the credit card machine miraculously started working again, chances are, someone like me fixed it. That's what brought me to Arizona last February. Route 66 was quiet that week. All sand and wind and the endless stretch of cracked asphalt that hums beneath your tires like a whisper. I'd been driving since Flagstaff heading west toward Kingman, when the sun started to dip and the radio faded into static. I figured I'd crash somewhere for the night, grab a shower, and hit the next job in the morning. About 20 miles outside Kingman, I saw it, a flickering neon sign just off the road. Desert View Motel. The V was dead and the rest buzzed faintly in the dusk. The place looked like it hadn't been updated since the 70s. 8 rooms, maybe 10, all in a single row with faded blue doors and old metal chairs out front. A vending machine stood crooked near the office, its glass half smashed, and there was a soda can stuck in the slot. I pulled in, gravel crunching under my tires, and for a second I wondered if the place was even open. The office light glowed orange, though, and inside was a short man with a gray beard, sitting behind the counter with a transistor radio playing some tinny old country song. He looked up when I came in. "You got any rooms?" I asked. "Always do," he said, smiling without really smiling. "Just you?" "Yeah." He slid a key across the counter, one of those old brass keys with a fat green plastic tag that said Room 5. He didn't ask for my license, didn't take a card. Just told me it'd be 40 cash, which I paid. When I asked if there was a diner nearby, he said there used to be one, down the road a piece, but it shut down years ago. Then he said, "Don't mind the wind tonight. It gets loud out here." The room was exactly what I expected. Beige carpet stiff with dust, a humming wall unit that smelled like burnt wires, and a bed that looked like it had been slept in by half of Arizona. Still, I'd stayed in worse. I took a quick shower. The water came out brown for a second before clearing, and sat on the edge of the bed flipping through channels that were nothing but snow. There was no Wi-Fi, no cell service, just me, the wind, and the hum of the old sign outside. I remember stepping out around 10 to smoke. The night was colder than I thought it'd be. Out beyond the lot was just desert, flat, pale sand and yucca plants bending in the wind. And something else, too, a faint glow far off to the north, like headlights, but they never moved. I figured it was a town or a truck stop. But the weird thing was how quiet everything was. No crickets, no engines on the highway. Just the wind moaning through the gaps in the motel's siding. Around midnight, I heard something. A knock, not on my door, not exactly. It was like someone had tapped on the window and then walked away. I froze, cigarette halfway to my mouth. The curtains moved slightly, but that could have been the draft. I stepped closer and peered outside. Nothing. Just the lot, the other rooms, and my old Chevy parked by the sign. I thought maybe the manager was checking up, or maybe another guest was fooling around. But every room except mine looked dark. I went back to bed, but I couldn't shake that feeling. that someone had been standing just inches away from me, separated only by thin glass. Sometime in the early morning, maybe 3 or 4, I woke up again. The wind had died completely. The silence was heavy, thick. Then I heard something new, a low rumbling like a car idling far off. I got up, went to the window again, and saw headlights moving slowly down the road. But when I stepped outside to look, the lights vanished, just blinked out like someone had flipped a switch. That's when I noticed something odd. The neon motel sign wasn't on anymore. The whole lot was pitch black. I thought maybe the power had gone out, so I walked over to the office, but the door was locked, and the radio that had been playing before was silent. I called out for the manager. Nothing, just my voice echoing back. I went back to my room and sat on the bed until the sky started to lighten. The air smelled different, sharp, metallic, almost like rain on hot asphalt, but there were no clouds. When dawn finally broke, I decided to check out early. I packed up my stuff, grabbed the key, and went outside. The light hit the motel in that strange desert way, and everything bright but colorless. That's when my stomach dropped. The sign that had said Desert View Motel wasn't there anymore. I mean, the pole was, but the sign itself gone. No wires, no bulbs, just a metal frame. I walked around the office. The vending machine was gone too, like it had never been there. And when I looked out at the road, something inside me went cold. The highway was cracked and empty, half covered in sand. No cars, no tire marks, no sign of power lines or gas stations or anything else. Just open desert stretching out for miles. I turned around looking for my car. And that's when I realized it wasn't in the lot. My Chevy, the one I'd parked right under the sign, was gone. I stood there for what felt like an hour, scanning the horizon, calling out like an idiot. The only sound was the wind picking up again. I started walking down the road, thinking maybe it had rolled somehow, maybe someone had taken it. But after a few hundred yards, I saw something in the distance, glinting in the sunlight. It was my car, parked on the side of the road, miles from the motel. The doors were locked, keys still in my pocket. I don't know how long it took me to reach it. Maybe 30 minutes, maybe more. But when I finally got there, I looked back. I expected to see the motel behind me, the row of rooms and the office and the empty lot. But there was nothing. Just desert. No buildings, no sign, no road leading back. Just a flat stretch of sand and the mountains far in the distance, shimmering in the heat. I remember standing there, heart pounding, dust in my throat, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. My GPS still thought I was near Kingman, but it showed no roads, no landmarks, just a blank space. I started the engine and drove. The needle hovered near empty, but I didn't care. I just kept going until the horizon shifted and the desert gave way to something familiar. A diner, a gas station, a few houses. I pulled over and stumbled out, asking the first person I saw where the nearest motel was. The man looked at me funny. "Only one out here's the sunset view up in Hackberry," he said. "Ain't been one called Desert View in hell 30 years. Burned down in 92, I didn't say anything. I just stood there, dust in my hair, trying to steady my hands. He must have noticed how pale I looked because he asked if I was okay. I told him I was fine and just tired, and got back in the car. I drove until I hit Kingman, checked into a chain motel, and spent the rest of the day staring at the ceiling, replaying everything. But here's the thing that still gets me. When I finally went to unload my bag, I found the motel key, the one marked Room 5, sitting on the passenger seat. The green tag was melted around the edges like it had been held to a flame. I didn't go back to the Desert View Motel for almost a year. I told myself there was no point. What would I even be going back to? According to every record I could find online, the place had burned down decades ago. Faulty wiring, one survivor, no rebuild. But the memory never left me. You can't just file something like that away and move on. Every time I drove past a stretch of empty highway or saw an old neon sign flickering in the distance, I'd feel that same cold weight pressing down on me. I started checking maps, news archives, old county property records. Nothing. It was as if that little stretch of road between Kingman and Hackberry had been erased. The coordinates where my GPS had placed me that morning led to an empty patch of desert. No structures, no road, not even a dirt trail. Still, I couldn't shake the thought that I'd been there, that I'd slept in that bed, turned that brass key, heard that knock on my window. By October, I'd convinced myself it was a hallucination. Maybe I'd been sleep deprived. Maybe I'd pulled off somewhere else and my mind filled in the rest. But that theory fell apart one night when I found the key again. I'd locked it away in my glove box, figuring I'd throw it out later. Only now, when I opened it, the tag didn't say room 5. It said room 6. Same color, same melted edges. But the number was different, printed fresh and clear like it had been replaced. I don't know why, but that detail gutted me. Like the motel wasn't just gone, it had changed. I told myself I'd stop thinking about it. But that December, work took me back through Arizona, and when I hit Route 66, something in me decided I needed to see that stretch again, even if there was nothing there. Maybe especially if there was nothing. It was around 4 p.m. when I turned off the main road, following what looked like an old service path that broke away from the highway. The sun was dropping behind the hills, painting the desert red and gold. I drove for miles, just dust and silence. My gas gauge hovered low again, and I almost turned back when I saw something. Not buildings exactly, but the faint outline of structures against the horizon. For a second I thought it was a mirage, but as I got closer I saw the curve of a roof, the stub of a sign, the glint of metal chairs outside a row of doors. It was there. The Desert View Motel. It looked just like before. Same faded paint, same buzzing sign. Though this time the E was dead instead of the V. My car trembled as I pulled into the lot, and I swear for a second I could smell that same sharp metallic scent in the air. There were tire tracks in the dirt, fresh ones. And when I stepped out, I heard the faint hum of electricity. I walked toward the office, my boots crunching on gravel. Inside, the same counter, the same transistor radio playing the same broken country tune, but there was no one behind the desk. Only the smell of stale coffee and dust. There was a notebook open on the counter, the kind used for guest sign-ins. The last entry was dated February 12th. My date. My name, my handwriting. I touched the page, half expecting it to smear, but it was dry, crisp, real. I stepped back, heart hammering, trying to calm myself. The logical part of my brain was shouting. Maybe this was another motel, maybe someone rebuilt it under the same name. But it didn't add up. There were no recent permits, no town records, no evidence that anything stood here, and yet it was. I turned toward the rooms, the sunlight stretching long across the dirt. Room 5's door was open, just a crack, swaying gently in the wind. I don't know why I went in. Maybe I thought I'd find proof, something solid to explain it all. Inside, everything was the same. The bed, the faded wallpaper, the TV sitting dead in the corner. Only now there was something written on the mirror in what looked like dust or ash. 5 words, "You checked out too early." My stomach twisted. I stumbled backward, hitting the dresser. The smell of burnt plastic filled the air. I looked down and saw a melted green tag lying by the leg of the bed. Room 6. I grabbed it without thinking and ran. Out the door, across the lot, back to my car. My hands were shaking so bad I dropped the keys twice before starting the engine. I didn't look back. I just drove, flooring it until the asphalt appeared again and the faint lights of Kingman showed on the horizon. When I stopped for gas, I went inside to pay, and the clerk, a kid maybe 20, froze when he saw me. "Hey," he said slowly, "didn't you come through here last week?" I told him no and hadn't been in Arizona for months. He frowned. "Huh, weird. Some guy came in, looked just like you. Same truck, too. Said he was headed for the Desert View Motel. I told him there's nothing out there anymore." My chest went cold. "What did he say?" I asked. The kid hesitated. He just smiled and said he'd been there before. That night I stayed at a chain hotel in Kingman again, but I didn't sleep. Around 3 a.m. my phone buzzed. No number, just unknown caller. I didn't answer. It rang 3 times, then stopped. A minute later I got a text. No words, just a picture. It was the front of the Desert View Motel. My truck parked under the sign. Except the sign didn't say Desert View anymore. It said vacancy. I left Arizona the next morning, told my boss I was done with field work, transferred to a desk job in Albuquerque. It's been months now. Most nights are quiet. But sometimes, just before dawn, when everything's still, I hear it again. That faint buzzing hum like an old neon sign flickering somewhere just out of sight. And once, a few weeks back, I found a motel key sitting on my kitchen counter. Not room 5, not room 6, this one was burned completely black. No number, no name. Just the faint smell of smoke and desert wind. If you ever find yourself driving west on Route 66 and see a flickering neon sign that shouldn't be there, keep driving. Don't pull in. No matter how tired you are, no matter how empty the road feels. 'Cause some places don't just want guests. They keep them. And if you check in once, you might never really check out. My name's Adam, and I make my living through photographs. Not the glamorous kind. Not weddings or fashion shoots or any of that. I take pictures of forgotten places. Abandoned motels, crumbling mines, ghost towns nobody visits anymore except for thrill seekers and weirdos with cameras like me. It's not a bad gig. Pays enough for gas, food, and the occasional motel. I get solitude, quiet, and the kind of stillness that makes the world seem older than it is. That's what drew me to Chloride, Arizona. Population, less than 400, maybe half that still breathing. The oldest mining town in the state, they call it. Founded in the 1860s. Boomed, busted, and now it's a handful of weathered houses, a general store, and a tavern that still serves beer out of dusty bottles. The rest is ruins and rusted equipment, mine shafts sealed with boards, and a graveyard with more headstones than people. Perfect for the kind of eerie shots my audience eats up. I arrived in late March, the air already dry enough to split your lips. The highway was empty, heat shimmering on the asphalt, and when I finally turned off toward town, it felt like I'd crossed into another time. There was a wooden sign that read, "Welcome to Chloride, established 1860 in faded paint," and beyond it, nothing but dirt roads and silence. I parked near the old mercantile building, the one that still had Hanson's General Goods barely visible on the front. My plan was simple: spend 2 days documenting the area, maybe camp one night for those long exposure star shots, then move on toward Oatman. I started shooting right away, peeling paint, shattered glass, the jagged entrance of a mine shaft that had been swallowed by shadow. The light out there does strange things. It's so clean, so unforgiving that even a pile of junk looks sacred through a lens. Around sunset, I wandered into the center of town, if you could call it that. A few houses still had lights on. There was a bar, the Silver Tap, where 2 locals sat out front drinking beer and watching the wind kick dust across the road. They nodded at me when I passed. I nodded back. Friendly enough. I asked them if it was okay to camp near the old mine road, and one of them, an older guy with a white beard, squinted at me and said, "Ain't nobody gonna stop you. Just don't go past the ridge after dark." I asked why. He shrugged. "You'll hear him if you do." The other man chuckled, but the sound didn't feel like a joke. That night I set up camp about half a mile from town. The desert sky stretched wider than I'd ever seen, full of stars that looked close enough to touch. I set up my tripod and camera to capture long exposures of the ruins, letting the shutter drink in the faint light. When I checked the screen, the images were perfect, eerie, silent, beautiful. But one of them made me pause. In the corner of a shot near the edge of a building, there was something, or someone, standing there. Just a blur of shape, human-like but too still, too sharp against the darkness. I figured it was a shadow or lens flare. Still, I deleted it and reshot the frame. By midnight, the wind picked up. It came in low and constant, whispering through the sagebrush. I sat by the small fire I'd made, listening to it. Then I heard something else, the soft click of a camera shutter. Not mine. I froze, the hairs on my arms rising. It came again, clear this time, from somewhere behind me. Click, click, click. I turned, flashlight in hand, shining it across the dunes and broken timbers. Nothing. Just wind and the hiss of sand. I told myself I was hearing things, that maybe the fire crackling sounded like that. Still, I packed my camera and locked it in the Jeep. The rest of the night, I barely slept. At dawn, I woke to find something strange. My camp was untouched, but my camera tripod had been moved. Not far, just rotated a few inches, facing toward the hills behind me instead of the ruins. I hadn't done that. And when I checked my camera, there were new photos on the card. 5 of them, all taken around 3 a.m. The first was black. The second showed part of my tent, dimly lit by the fire's last glow. The third was closer, almost as if someone had crouched and pointed the lens directly at me while I slept. The fourth, my face, eyes half open, unfocused, caught mid-breath. And the fifth, the same frame but with something else behind me. A silhouette in the distance, tall, narrow, head slightly tilted like it was watching. I deleted the pictures immediately, telling myself it had to be some kind of glitch or remote trigger malfunction. Maybe I'd rolled onto the camera or set the timer without realizing, but deep down I knew better. Someone had been there. Someone who knew how to use a camera, someone who wanted me to see. I packed up and drove into town, nerves buzzing like static. The same two men were sitting outside the bar. I told them someone had been in my camp. They looked at each other, then back at me. "Did you go past the ridge?" the older one asked. I said no, just the mine road. He nodded slowly. "Then it wasn't a person." The other man muttered something I didn't catch. "You folks always come out here looking for ghosts," the old man said finally. "But you never think maybe they're looking for you too." I laughed it off, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I told myself I'd get one more round of photos and leave before dark. I spent the afternoon shooting the graveyard. Rows of cracked headstones, names half worn away, crosses made of rebar. The air was still heavy. When I checked my camera between shots, I noticed something unsettling. Every third or fourth picture had faint light distortion in the corner, like a lens flare but consistent, circular, like the glint of another lens. Like someone was taking a picture of me from a distance. As the sun dipped, I packed up and started toward my Jeep. That's when I saw it, across the dry creek bed, near the ridge. A figure standing still, too far to make out details, but tall, lean, with what looked like a camera strap slung around its neck. I lifted my camera instinctively, zoomed in, and froze. The face was pale, features blurred by distance, but the posture, it mirrored mine exactly. Same tilt of the head, same hand on the lens. I blinked and it was gone. Not walked away. Just gone, like it had never been there. I didn't stick around after that. I drove back to the motel in Kingman, heart pounding the whole way. But when I plugged in my camera to back up the shot, something made my blood run cold. Among the photos from Chloride after the ones I remembered taking, there was a new image I hadn't shot. It was of my Jeep, parked outside the Kingman Motel, taken from across the street. At night, I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw flashes. Not dreams, but still images, like the afterburn of a flashbulb. My Jeep parked under the motel sign. My tent by the mine road. My face half lit, caught off guard. Each photo burned itself into my mind until I couldn't tell if I was remembering or reliving them. By morning, I'd convinced myself there had to be a rational explanation. Some twisted prank. Maybe someone in Chloride who got their kicks scaring tourists. That made sense, sort of. But then I noticed something. The metadata on that last photo, the one of my Jeep at the motel, said it had been taken before I even left Chloride. 2 hours before I arrived. That shouldn't have been possible. I spent the next day trying to shake it off. Drove north toward Meadview, took some shots of the canyon ridges, but I couldn't focus. Every time I checked my camera, I half expected to find more of those unwanted pictures. Late in the afternoon, I stopped at a diner off the highway, ordered coffee I didn't drink, and opened my laptop. I zoomed into the mysterious photos, the one from my camp, the one of my Jeep, looking for anything that would explain it. A reflection, a watermark, a clue. That's when I saw it. In the reflection of my Jeep's side mirror, faint but unmistakable, was a figure. Same height, same build as the one I'd seen near the ridge. Camera strap, dark jacket. Only this time the face was clearer. And it was mine. I don't remember leaving the diner. I must have driven for hours because by the time I looked, up the sun was gone and the desert was nothing but black and shadow. I pulled over, breathing hard, palms slick with sweat. The air outside was still, unnaturally still. I checked my phone. No signal. I told myself I just needed rest, that my mind was playing tricks on me after too many sleepless nights. I leaned, back in the seat, and must have drifted off because the next thing I remember is the sound of a camera shutter. Click. I shot upright, heart pounding, eyes darting around the cab. The road was empty, stretching both ways into nothing. The windshield reflected only my own face in the dim light. Then I saw something, a flash, just for a second, from the hills behind me, like someone taking a photo in the dark. I started the engine and floored it, driving blind, gravel spitting behind the tires. I didn't stop until I hit Chloride again. I don't even know why I went back. Maybe some desperate part of me thought if I faced it head-on, it would end. The town looked different that night, quieter, emptier. Even the bar was dark. I parked near the general store and stepped out, camera in hand. The wind had picked up, dry and cold, carrying that faint metallic taste I'd noticed before. I turned my flashlight toward the ridge. The beam caught something glinting near the mine entrance and a lens reflecting light. I moved closer, each step crunching on the gravel until I was standing at the mouth of the shaft. My own footprints were still there from before, but next to them were others. Barefoot, small, like a child's, but they led deeper into the tunnel. "Hello?" My voice came out thin, swallowed by the dark. "If someone's out there, I just want to talk." No answer, just the low hum of wind through the rocks. I raised my camera, snapped a shot. The flash lit up the tunnel for half a second. Wood supports, debris, the shimmer of moisture on the walls. Nothing else. I turned to leave, but then I heard it. That same click, right behind me. I spun around, flash again, blinding white for a heartbeat. When my vision cleared, something stood a few feet away. It was me. Or something that looked like me. Same jacket, same camera hanging from its neck. But the face wasn't right. The eyes were too deep, the mouth stretched in a way that didn't belong on a human face. It lifted its camera. Click. The flash went off and I stumbled backward, blinded. My foot caught a rock and I went down hard. When I looked up again, the tunnel was empty. I ran until my lungs burned, until I could see the faint glow of the town streetlights again. My Jeep sat exactly where I'd left it, door open, engine cold. The digital clock on the dash said 3:12 a.m., though I could have sworn it hadn't been more than a few minutes since I'd left. I drove until sunrise, not caring where I was going. When I finally stopped at a gas station near Kingman, I checked the camera out of morbid curiosity. There were new photos, a whole sequence. The first few showed the tunnel, the rock, my footprints. Then, my body lying on the ground, half in shadow, eyes closed, face pale. The last one was taken from behind the lens from my own point of view, showing the thing that wore my face smiling into the camera. I smashed the camera right there in the parking lot, took a hammer from my toolbox and broke it into pieces until there was nothing left but plastic and glass. The clerk came out yelling, but I didn't care. I threw the remains into the dumpster and drove home. For days afterward, I couldn't stand to see my reflection. Every mirror in my apartment stayed covered. Even now, I catch myself flinching when I pass a window at night, because sometimes just for a second I see something off. The tilt of the head, the faint curve of a grin that isn't mine. Last week, a package showed up at my door. No return address, just my name written in a handwriting I didn't recognize. Inside was a single photo print, glossy, high resolution. It showed me sitting in my car, staring at my own camera on the passenger seat. The timestamp read March 19th, the day I first arrived in Chloride. If you ever visit that town, leave before dark. Don't take pictures, don't stop for the light, and for God's sake, if you hear a shutter click in the silence, don't look toward it. Because in Chloride, once you've been seen, something out there wants to keep your image forever, and sooner or later it starts to look back through you. My name's Ray Collins, and once upon a time I had a voice people actually recognized. From 1972 to 1978, I hosted the late-night slot on KRVN 103.4 FM out of Kingman, Arizona. The Midnight Signal, they called it. 3 hours of static, songs, and strange company for the insomniacs and truckers crossing Route 93. I used to joke that I had more conversations with dead air than with living people. Turns out maybe I wasn't too far off. After the fire in '78, the one that gutted most of Chloride and took my station with it, I quit radio for good. Moved to Bullhead, did odd jobs. Tried to forget the smell of burnt wires and the sound of my own signal dying mid-song, but you can't ever really shake the sound. Static gets in your bones. It hums in the quiet places of your life waiting. It started again last winter. 47 years since the fire. I was living alone in a trailer on the edge of the desert, trying to finish a book nobody would ever read. A memoir about those long nights on the air. I'd kept one old radio from the KRVN studio, a Hallicrafters SX-110 heavy as sin and older than me. Most nights I'd tune through the dead bands, just listening. Comfort noise. A man's heartbeat when the world gets too still. But that night, the static wasn't random. I'd been drifting between frequencies when I caught something faint under the hiss. A voice. I leaned in, turning the dial slow. It came through again. Male, distant, warped like it was traveling through dust. KRVN. Broadcasting. From Ash Creek. I froze. Ash Creek. That was the town next to ours, the one that burned to the ground in '78. Nobody lived there anymore. Nobody had since the fire, and KRVN, that signal hadn't existed in decades. I checked the clock, 2:17 a.m. I grabbed a notebook and scribbled down the frequency, 103.4 FM. My old station's band. Then the voice came back, clearer this time. You're listening to the midnight signal. With Ray Collins, my throat went dry. I hadn't said those words since the night of the fire. But it wasn't a replay. The voice was live, breathing between the crackles. Then, as if aware of me, it laughed. My laugh, I turned the radio off and just sat there staring at the dark. The wind pressed against the trailer walls, the sound like someone whispering through the static. After a while, I convinced myself it was bleed over. Some stray signal bouncing off the canyon. It happens sometimes. Old analog bands can do weird things when the air is right. Still, I couldn't shake it. The next night at the same time, I turned the Hallicrafters back on. Same frequency. The static was waiting like it had been holding its breath. I almost shut it off when the voice came again. Good evening, night owls. This one goes out to Ray Collins. If you're still out there, then came music. Wichita Lineman by Glenn Campbell. The same track I'd been playing when the station caught fire in '78. The song cut halfway through, replaced by that faint whisper of flames crackling and the slow, rhythmic thud of something heavy hitting metal, like a studio door being kicked in. I didn't sleep that night. Every sound in the trailer felt amplified. The wind, the hum of the fridge, even the pulse in my neck. I told myself I wouldn't listen again. I unplugged the radio, pushed it to the back of the shelf. But at 2:17 a.m., the Hallicrafters turned itself back on. The dial glowed weak red, and the same voice spoke, not through the speaker, but from behind me. Ray. We never signed off. The air went cold. My breath fogged in the room. And from the radio, faintly, I heard other voices, too. My old co-host, the engineer, the station manager. All dead. All burned in that fire. They were calling out song requests like nothing had changed. I ran outside into the desert night barefoot, heart hammering. The stars were sharp, the air thin, and for a moment I thought I heard the faint echo of music drifting from nowhere. A radio signal, impossible and wrong, threading through the wind. When I came back inside, the Hallicrafters was dead again. No light, no sound, no power. But on the notebook where I'd written the frequency, there was a new line. Shaky, smudged in pencil dust. I swear to God I didn't write it. Don't leave us waiting, Ray, it's your shift. I threw a blanket over the radio, locked it in the closet, and sat there until sunrise. But deep down I knew what would happen. Old frequencies never stay buried. They just wait for someone to tune in again. The next day I told myself I'd imagined it. That the brain plays tricks when you've been alone too long. But that explanation started to crumble when I went to check the Hallicrafters and found that it had been moved. The radio was now sitting on my kitchen counter, its cord neatly coiled, dust wiped off the chrome. I hadn't touched it since the night before. For the next few days I left the trailer, drove to Bullhead, spent time around people, ate at a diner, drank coffee that tasted like battery acid, tried to feel normal. But every night around 2 in the morning my phone would buzz. No caller ID, no sound, just static. Always at 2:17 a.m. On the 5th night I finally answered. Ray, a voice said through the noise. You're late. It sounded like Tommy, my old sound engineer. He died in that fire. I remember because I pulled his body from the rubble. I hung up and drove. Didn't know where I was going at first, just followed instinct. The desert roads were empty, the sky bleeding starlight. By the time I realized where I was headed, my stomach sank. Ash Creek. That town had burned down decades ago. I'd covered stories about it before the fire. Mining accidents, meth houses, that kind of thing. But now nothing should have been left except blackened ruins and desert weeds. Still, the road led straight there, as if it had been waiting. When I reached the old station site, I parked by the busted sign that once read, KRVN 103.4, the voice of the valley. The building was gone. Just the skeletal remains of the foundation, warped metal and shards of red brick scattered like bones. The desert was dead silent. No wind, no crickets, nothing. Just that old radio hum in my ears. Then I heard it. Faint music coming from nowhere. I followed the sound around the ruins until I saw the transmission tower. Or what was left of it, half-collapsed cables dangling like vines. But at the very top, one red beacon light still flickered. It shouldn't have. The power grid here was long gone, and yet the air around the tower vibrated, like a heartbeat pulsing through the ground. Then through that deep electric hum, I heard my own voice. This one goes out to everyone still listening. Out there in the dark. I hadn't said those words since the night of the fire. My chest tightened. The voice echoed across the desert, layered with static overlapping like multiple recordings of me whispering over each other. Then came another voice, female, soft, almost pleading. Don't leave, Ray. We can hear you. I turned and saw the shadows, faint outlines of figures standing between the ruins. I could make out faces I recognized. Tommy, Sherry, even the manager, Hal. Their eyes glowed faint amber like the vacuum tubes of an old radio warming up. It's your shift, Tommy said. The signal can't run without you. When I stepped back, the ground under me gave way, a sinkhole opening like a mouth. I fell about 6 feet before landing on concrete. Dust filled my throat. When I turned my flashlight on, I realized I was in the old control room, buried beneath layers of debris, and in front of me, covered in ash but perfectly intact, was the broadcast console. All the equipment was humming, dials turning, meters flickering, and right in the middle of the board sat a brand new microphone. The on-air sign glowed red. Then the headphones, my old pair, cracked leather and all, lifted off the table on their own and hung in the air, waiting. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe curiosity, maybe guilt, maybe something stronger. I put them on. The moment the ear cups sealed, the static roared in, and beneath it I heard thousands of whispers, familiar voices, all the late-night callers I'd ever talked to, truckers, insomniacs, lonely souls who used to tune in just to feel less alone. They were all there, trapped in that hum. Play something for us, Ray. The mic light flickered. My hand trembled as I reached for the console, and the vinyl on the turntable began to spin on its own. Glenn Campbell again, Wichita lineman. Good to have you back, Tommy said. The song played, but the lyrics twisted midway, voices bending, slowing, melting into that same rising scream of feedback I'd heard before the fire. I ripped the headphones off and ran for the ladder, climbed out into the cold air. Behind me, the radio signal pulsed louder, following me. When I reached my truck, the engine wouldn't start. Every radio on the dashboard came alive at once, even the ones that weren't connected to anything. My own voice filled the cab. You can't leave, Ray, the station never closed. I remember screaming, hitting the gas, and tearing away down the dirt road. The static followed me all the way back to Bullhead, a cloud of invisible electricity, whispering my name in the frequency of 103.4. That was 6 months ago. Now, every night at exactly 2:17 a.m., my Hallicrafters turns on by itself. The light flickers red, and I hear my own voice on air. Not a recording. It talks about things I haven't done yet, things that will happen. Last night it said my name, slow and deliberate. Ray Collins, signing off. For the last time. The clock hit 2:17. And outside my trailer across the desert, the red beacon from the old tower blinked once, then went dark. I haven't slept since. I don't listen to the radio anymore. But sometimes when the wind cuts through the canyons just right, I swear I can still hear the midnight signal, faint under the static. And somewhere far out in that empty desert, a voice that sounds exactly like mine is still talking. You're listening to KRVN 103.4 FM, where the night never ends. My name's Daniel Ward, and I've been working the night shift at a gas station off Interstate 40 just outside Ash Fork, Arizona, for the better part of 6 years. I took the job because I thought it would be quiet, just me, the hum of the fluorescents, and the occasional trucker passing through. There's a kind of peace in the desert at night, the way the air cools, the sound of the highway like a heartbeat in the distance. But the thing about quiet is, once it lasts too long, it starts to listen back. I started seeing him in February of 2022, cold month even for Arizona. It was a little past 2 a.m. when a car pulled up to pump number 3, an old '89 Crown Victoria, beige with sun-faded paint and a missing rearview mirror. The engine sounded like gravel in a blender. The driver didn't get out right away, so I stepped outside to check. That's when I saw him. He was tall, thin, wearing a tan trench coat that looked too big for him. His face was long and pale, hair slicked back in a way people don't wear anymore. He smiled when he saw me, but it wasn't the friendly kind. It was the kind of smile that knows something you don't. "Evenin'," he said. Voice smooth, polite. "Regular, please." I nodded, filled his tank and told him the total, $26.40. He handed me exact change, coins and all, without looking. When I tried to hand him the receipt, he just said, "Keep it. I'll be back tomorrow." I didn't think much of it at first. People say weird things in the middle of the night. But the next night, at the same time, 2:03 a.m., that same Crown Vic pulled in, same pump, same man. Same coat, same words. "Regular, please." Exact change. Then he came again the next night. And the next. Every single night without fail, for weeks. I started keeping track. He always arrived between 2:02 and 2:05 a.m., always used pump 3, always paid exact change. Never said more than a few words. Sometimes I'd glance out the window after he left and the taillights would just fade into the desert. Never saw him get on the highway. Never saw him turn anywhere. Just gone. By the third week, it was getting under my skin. So one night I asked him, "You live around here?" He smiled again, that same strange, polite curl of his lips. "Nearby." That was it. Nothing more. Later that shift, I checked the cameras. Every single night, his arrival was there. Headlights flaring into the lot, him stepping out, pumping gas. But when I tried to pause the frame on his face, the image blurred, like the lens couldn't quite hold him. On March 12th, things got worse. Around 1:55 a.m., before he showed up, the lights in the station started to flicker. My radio went dead, and the temperature dropped fast enough that I could see my breath. Then the Crown Vic rolled in, smoother than ever, like it was gliding. He stepped out, same coat, same smile, but his voice was off this time, thinner, like something was imitating him. "Regular, please." I filled the tank again, trying to hide my nerves. When I looked up, his eyes were on me. Cold, colorless like the desert sky before dawn. I handed him the receipt just to see what he'd do. This time he took it. He looked at it, nodded and said, "You're paying attention now." Then he got in his car and drove off. That line stuck in my head all night. "You're paying attention now." I barely slept that day. When I came back the next night, I checked pump 3. Everything looked normal, except for one thing. The digital screen showed the same number from the previous night, $26. Free. It hadn't reset. At 2:03 a.m., he came again. This time, I decided to follow him. As soon as he pulled away, I locked up the station and jumped into my truck. The highway was empty except for his Crown Vic. I stayed back about 100 yards, headlights off. He drove east for about 3 miles before turning onto a narrow dirt road. No signs, no markings. Just a long trail leading toward the black outline of the hills. After a few minutes, his taillights vanished, like someone had switched them off. I hit the gas and followed the dust trail, but the road ended abruptly at an old, burned-out diner. The kind that used to dot the highway back in the 60s. Broken sign, windows boarded, roof caved in, and sitting in front of it, half buried in sand, was that same Crown Victoria. I got out, heart pounding, flashlight shaking in my hand. The car was cold, engine dead. No footprints, no tire tracks leading away. Then I saw the license plate. Rusted, bent, but still readable. AZ 1976. That plate design hadn't been used in decades. I took a photo, but when I checked my phone later, the image was pure static. When I got back to the station, my boss was waiting. Said a state trooper had stopped by earlier asking questions about me. Something about a man matching my description seen trespassing near old Route 66 ruins. I didn't tell her what I'd seen. Who would believe it? That night, I checked the pumps again. Pump 3's digital display was off, totally black. When I tried to turn it on, it blinked once, showing the number 2640 again, and a second line underneath, "See you tomorrow." I quit that night, but 2 weeks later I was driving through Ash Fork again. Couldn't help myself. I slowed as I passed the gas station. It looked the same. Same cracked asphalt, same flickering light over pump 3. And there he was. That same man in the tan trench coat filling his car, smiling at me through the glass, only this time I wasn't working there. He shouldn't have been able to see me, but he lifted his hand, 2 fingers to his temple, like a salute. And, in the reflection of the window, just for a moment, I saw myself, standing behind the counter wearing my old uniform, watching him like I used to. After that night, I told myself I was done with Ash Fork. I packed up, drove to Flagstaff, got a job unloading trucks. It was honest work, loud, busy, the kind that kept my mind too tired to wander. But the desert has a way of calling you back, especially when it thinks you owe it something. The first time it happened was 3 weeks after I quit. I woke up at 2:03 a.m., drenched in sweat, heart pounding, because I'd heard the sound of a gas pump clicking off. That sharp metallic clunk that means the tank's full. The sound came from outside my window. I looked, and there was nothing there. No car, no light, just the empty motel parking lot. But the air smelled faintly of gasoline. That same week, I started getting phone calls from the gas station. I knew it was the same number. I recognized it instantly. The calls always came at the same time, 2:03 a.m. When I picked up, I'd hear the background hum of fluorescent lights and that faint bell chime that rang when the door opened. Then silence. Sometimes, right before it hung up, I'd hear a voice, distant, familiar. "Regular, please." I didn't go back at first. I tried to ignore it, tried to tell myself it was a prank or a glitch. But after the 4th night, I gave in. I got in my truck and drove south, following the road that runs like a scar through the desert. The moon was low, orange and swollen. The closer I got to Ash Fork, the worse the static on my radio got. By the time I hit the exit, every station was just white noise. When I pulled into the gas station lot, I half expected to find it gone, demolished, condemned, erased. But it was still there, still open. The lights over pump 3 flickered weakly, throwing pale halos across the cracked asphalt. Only one car was parked there, the Crown Victoria. It looked exactly the same. Same tan paint, same missing mirror, same plate, AZ 1976. The man was standing beside it, coat buttoned up to his neck. He turned as I stepped out of my truck, smiling like we'd never skipped a night. "Evening, Daniel," he said. His voice was calm, warm even, like he'd been waiting for me. "You're not real," I said before I could stop myself. He tilted his head. "Neither are you anymore." The words hit me like a hammer. I froze. He stepped closer. "You never left, son." "Been right here, working the counter every night since March." I looked toward the glass storefront. My reflection stared back at me, only it wasn't me. The man in the window wore my old uniform. Same name tag, same tired eyes. He was standing in my old spot behind the register, motionless, hands flat on the counter. Then I saw the calendar on the wall behind him. March 2022. The page hadn't turned. I turned back to the man, but he was already at the pump, filling the tank like always. The gas meter ticked slowly, steady as a heartbeat. The digital display glowed 2640s and then froze. The air got colder. The buzzing lights dimmed, replaced by a low rumble rising from underground. The smell of gasoline thickened, metallic and sweet. I looked down and saw that the pump hose wasn't connected to the car anymore. It was sinking into the asphalt, disappearing into a widening crack that split the ground open. "You know what you've been fueling, don't you?" the man said. His voice had changed, deeper, echoing. The desert around us seemed to stretch farther, darker, like the stars were pulling away. He stepped toward me, and I finally saw his eyes clearly. Not eyes at all, just 2 black voids swirling with smoke. "You kept it alive," he said. "Every night you filled the tank. Every time you took the cash. That's how it stays open. What stays open?" I shouted. He smiled wider, teeth gleaming in the flickering light. "This place. I turned to run, but the gas station doors slammed shut on their own. The lights went out one by one until only pump 3 was left glowing faint red. I could hear the sound of engines idling. Not one, but dozens, hundreds maybe, all around me in the dark. I looked toward the road and my stomach turned. Cars, dozens of them. All the same kind. Crown Victorias stretching down the highway in both directions, engines humming in perfect unison. Every one of them had the same driver. The man in the tan trench coat, his face repeated over and over like a bad photograph. They all looked at me, and in the same voice they spoke. "Regular, please." I ran. The desert was endless, my breath sharp in the cold air. When I finally turned back, the gas station was gone. Just empty sand, no lights. No sign it had ever been there. I must have blacked out at some point because when I opened my eyes, it was morning. I was lying by the side of the highway, sun burning my face, truck parked beside me like I'd never left it. I thought maybe I'd dreamed it all until I looked at my hands. They smelled like gasoline. I drove to the sheriff's office in Ashfork to report what I'd seen, but when I mentioned the gas station off I-40, the deputy just frowned. Said that place had burned down in 1983 and faulty wiring, total loss. No survivors. I showed him my old pay stubs, my uniform, my keys. He shook his head. Said there hadn't been a gas station attendant named Daniel Ward in Ashfork since the fire. He even pulled an old newspaper clipping out of a file. The headline read, "Local gas station burns overnight. Attendant missing, presumed dead." The photo beneath it was black and white, grainy. But it was me, standing beside pump 3. That night I booked a motel and tried to sleep, but at 2:03 a.m., I woke to headlights flashing outside my window. A single car idling under the streetlight, the same Crown Victoria. When I looked closer, I saw the driver's seat was empty. The driver's side door hung open. The pump nozzle lay across the hood, and from the night air, faint but unmistakable, I heard it again. That smooth, familiar voice that had followed me for months. "Your shift's not over. Daniel." The car door slammed shut, the engine revved, and when I blinked, it was gone. I packed that night and left Arizona for good. Still, sometimes when I stop for gas on long drives, I swear I see that same tan coat standing by pump 3, and when the pump clicks off, the number always lands on 2640. I don't work nights anymore, but the desert remembers, and somewhere out on that highway, the last customer in Ashfork is still waiting for me to finish my shift. My name's Daniel, and for most of my life I thought the desert was empty. You know, just a flat, endless stretch of sand and scrub where nothing really lives except rattlesnakes, ghosts, and people trying to forget something. I used to drive through Arizona on photography trips, sunset shots, old barns, abandoned gas stations, but I never imagined I'd end up living there. My wife Lydia and I had been looking for a place to start over. We'd both been through hell. She'd lost her father to cancer, and I'd been laid off from a construction job in Flagstaff. We didn't have much, but we had a dream. To buy a little piece of land, something cheap, something quiet, and fix it up. That's how we found the house behind the yucca trees. It sat a few miles outside a town called Hackberry, off an old gravel road that didn't even have a name on Google Maps. The real estate ad said, "Rustic 2-bedroom home with desert views. Needs some work." That should have been our first warning. When a listing in Arizona says needs work, it usually means it needs a priest. We drove out there one blistering July afternoon, the kind where the air feels thick and metallic like breathing through a hairdryer. The road was lined with sun-bleached yucca trees, their spiked arms pointing toward the sky like they were pleading for rain. The house appeared suddenly just past a bend in the road, a squat stucco thing with a tin roof and boarded windows. It wasn't pretty, but it was standing. And in that desert heat, that was enough for me. Lydia stepped out of the car, shielding her eyes. "It's smaller than the pictures," she said softly. I laughed and told her it always is. The real estate agent, a wiry man named Clark, was waiting by the porch. He wore a tan suit that looked about 30 years out of style and had sweat stains under both arms. "You folks made good time," he said, shaking my hand. His grip was dry, papery. "You'll like it out here. Peaceful. Real peaceful." He said peaceful the way some people say buried. He led us through the house. The floors creaked, the walls smelled like dust and old smoke. There were 2 bedrooms, a kitchen barely big enough for a table, and a living room with a cracked brick fireplace. Out back was a shed, half collapsed, and a windmill that hadn't turned in years. Lydia frowned at the walls. "It feels strange," she said. "Like the rooms don't line up right." Clark chuckled nervously. "Oh, that's just old architecture. House was built in the 40s, before codes and all that." But later, when she wasn't looking, I saw him glance at the far corner of the hallway, the part where two doors met at an angle that didn't make sense. We bought it that week. The price was too good to walk away from. We moved in with what little we owned, a mattress, a folding table, and a box of dishes. At night, the desert went dead silent, the kind of silence that hums in your ears. Lydia said she could hear the wind moving through the yucca trees, whispering like voices. I told her it was probably just coyotes. The first time I noticed something wrong, it was around midnight 3 nights after we moved in. I got up for water and realized the kitchen doorway looked wider. Not by much, just enough to make my stomach twist. The light switch was a few inches higher than I remembered, too. I told myself I was half asleep. The next morning, everything looked normal again, but the changes kept happening. Small at first, then bigger. A wall that had been pale yellow looked off-white the next day. The bathroom mirror shifted lower as if it had been rehung. Lydia swore the living room window used to face the road, but one morning it looked out toward the shed. "Maybe we're just tired," I said. "Moving stress." She nodded, but her eyes were wide and tired. She didn't believe it either. One afternoon, we drove into town for groceries. Hackberry wasn't much, just a diner, a post office, and a bar that looked like it hadn't closed since 1975. While we were checking out at the general store, the cashier, a gray-haired woman with leathery skin, asked where we were staying. "Out by the old highway," I said. "The place behind the yucca trees." Her face changed instantly. "That house?" she asked quietly. "You bought that place?" Lydia and I looked at each other. "Yeah," I said slowly. "Why?" The woman shook her head. "That house ain't right. It's been empty for 20 years. People say it moves at night." She leaned closer. "You should leave before you can't find the door again." We laughed about it in the car, but neither of us said much after that. That night, I woke up to a noise, soft like someone dragging their hand along the wall. Lydia was asleep beside me. The sound came from the hallway. I turned on my phone's flashlight and stepped out. The air felt heavy still. The hallway seemed longer than before. I swear to God it was longer. The far end was swallowed in darkness, and when I walked toward it, the floorboards groaned in strange, uneven rhythms, like footsteps that weren't mine. I stopped halfway down and turned around. The bedroom door was gone. There was just more wall. I felt the blood drain from my body. I ran forward, heart hammering, and slammed into what felt like an invisible curtain. Then, blink, and the door was there again. The next morning, Lydia said she'd dreamed the same thing, walking down a hallway that never ended. We tried to stay calm. We even measured the rooms with tape, thinking maybe it was a trick of perception, but the numbers changed every time. The living room was 8 feet wide one day, 9.5 the next. Lydia stopped sleeping. She started keeping the lights on all night. A week later, we found a door in the kitchen that hadn't been there before. It was narrow, painted the same color as the wall, like it had been hiding in plain sight. Behind it was a staircase leading down into darkness. I remember looking at Lydia, her face pale and trembling, and saying, "Maybe it's just a root cellar," but deep down we both knew better. That night, I dreamed the house was breathing, walls expanding, contracting, the floor rising and falling like a chest. I could hear it sighing under my feet. When I woke, Lydia was sitting upright, staring at the ceiling. "It moved again," she whispered. "The whole house moved." And then she said something that made my skin crawl. "It's not a house, Daniel. It's pretending to be one." I didn't want to believe her. I told myself Lydia was just exhausted, that the desert heat was getting to her. But that night, when I walked through the house with a flashlight, I started seeing it breathe. Not literally, not like lungs, but like the whole structure flexed. Boards creaking, plaster tightening and loosening, tiny pops like joints cracking in the dark. The door to that hidden stairwell was still there, but now it looked different, wider, like it wanted us to notice it. Lydia sat in the living room with her arms around her knees, eyes fixed on the kitchen. I said her name softly. She didn't blink. When I touched her shoulder, she whispered, "It's waiting for us." We packed that night. I didn't care about the money anymore. I just wanted out. But when we tried to leave, the road wasn't where it should have been. The dirt path that ran from the driveway to the main road curved off behind the yucca trees and kept going, farther than it ever had before. I drove for 15 minutes and still didn't reach the pavement. The GPS showed we hadn't moved at all. Lydia started crying, saying she could see the house in the mirror, even though it should have been miles behind us. I turned around, ready to gun it through the sand if I had to. But when we reached the property again, the house wasn't there. Just open desert, silver under the moonlight, the wind pushing through the yucca stalks like whispers. "It's gone," Lydia said in a flat voice. "It's gone." We sat there in silence until the sun started to rise. And when the first light hit, the house was back. Same place, same angle, only it looked newer somehow. The paint brighter, the roof clean of rust. Like it had rebuilt itself while we weren't looking. I should have driven straight to town. I should have called someone. But I was scared to leave her alone. And Lydia was shaking, mumbling that we couldn't just abandon it, that it wanted us to see what was underneath. When she said that, her voice didn't sound like hers anymore. Around noon, she went inside. I was sitting in the truck, gripping the wheel, sweating through my shirt, when I realized she hadn't come back out. I shouted her name, got no answer. The front door was half open, swinging in the hot wind. Inside, everything looked warped. The furniture seemed farther apart, like the space between objects had stretched. The air was colder too, heavy and still. "Lydia?" I called, my voice echoing back wrong, like someone repeating it a few seconds late. I found her standing in the kitchen, staring down that stairwell. The air rising from it smelled like rust and earth. "It's calling me," she said, her face blank. I tried to pull her back, but her feet wouldn't move. I don't remember deciding to go down. I just remember the feel of the rail under my hand, rough wood, warm like skin, and the sound of our breathing as we descended. The stairs went on forever. The deeper we went, the more the walls changed, from plaster to packed earth to something else, something pulsing faintly beneath the beam of my flashlight. The air was wet, close. There were markings on the walls, not written but formed like veins under translucent skin. The steps started to curve until I wasn't sure if we were going down or just around. "Lydia," I said, and my voice came out small. She was ahead of me, her hair brushing the low ceiling. "Do you hear it?" she whispered. "It's the house breathing." I felt a vibration through the floorboards, a slow, rhythmic thump like a heartbeat somewhere below. My light flickered. When it came back, Lydia was gone. I shouted, my voice bouncing in strange ways, splitting into layers. The tunnel didn't echo right. It absorbed sound, like the house didn't want anyone outside to hear. I ran down, tripping, scraping my hands on the dirt, calling her name until I couldn't breathe. Then I saw her flashlight ahead lying on the floor, its beam aimed at a wall that shouldn't have been there. It was smooth and gray, curving slightly inward, like the inside of a rib cage. The beam of light trembled across it, and for a second, I saw it move just a ripple, like something alive shifting under a thin surface. I reached for her flashlight, but when my fingers touched the wall, it was warm, not like a sun-warmed rock, like skin. It pulsed once, and I stumbled back. That's when I heard her voice, not from ahead but behind me, whispering my name from the darkness. I turned, and she was standing there smiling faintly. Only her face wasn't quite right. Her eyes were darker, deeper, her skin too smooth. "It's okay," she said. "You'll understand soon." I took a step toward her, but something in me, some instinct older than thought, made me stop. "You're not her," I said, and she tilted her head like she was thinking. "I'm what she's a part of now." The walls began to move. The tunnel narrowed, and I heard that same low groaning sound from the night before, like timber shifting. But now it was all around me. I ran. The air grew thicker with every step, the darkness heavier, pressing on me. I hit the stairs and climbed, but the steps seemed to stretch away from me. Behind me, something dragged itself along the ground, slow and deliberate. When I reached the top, I didn't stop to look back. I burst into the kitchen, gasping, slamming the door shut behind me. The sunlight pouring through the windows looked wrong, orange and sickly, as if it was leaking through stained glass. The house was smaller now. I could feel it, the rooms closing in, corners bending toward me. The front door was gone again. Every window showed a different view, some desert, some pitch black. I kicked open the back door and ran. The windmill loomed above, its blades turning slowly even though there was no wind. I didn't look back until I reached the road, and when I did, the house was still there, crouched behind the yucca trees, its windows glinting in the sunlight like eyes. I drove to Hackberry in a daze. When I reached the general store, the same old cashier looked at me and went pale. "You came back," she said. "No one ever comes back." I tried to tell her what happened, but the words sounded insane even to me. She just shook her head. "That house ain't a house," she said quietly. "It's something old wearing a house like a skin. It moves when it's hungry." I left that night. I drove until the gas light came on, then slept in the truck on the side of the highway. When the sun came up, I looked back and saw the yucca trees on the horizon, and for a second I could swear there was something between them. Not a house exactly, but the suggestion of one. I never saw Lydia again. I went back once, a year later, just to be sure. The road was still there, but where the house had stood was nothing but sand and the rusted base of the old windmill. I thought that was the end of it. Until last month. I was flipping through an online real estate listing out of habit, looking at desert properties. And there it was. Rustic 2-bedroom home near Hackberry. Needs some work. Same porch, same tin roof, same line of yucca trees out front. Only this time, there was a picture of a woman standing on the porch smiling, and even though her face was turned slightly away, I knew that hair. I knew it was Lydia. My name's Jack Mercer, and I've been driving trucks for 23 years. I've seen just about everything this country has to offer. Rain that freezes sideways in Wyoming, mountains that swallow the sky in Colorado, and more lonely diners than I can count. But nothing stuck with me like what happened on that stretch of Arizona highway near Winslow. I don't talk about it much. Hell, I didn't even believe it myself for a long time. But some things get under your skin, crawl around in there and never leave. This is one of those. It was mid-March, maybe 2 in the morning. I was hauling a half-empty load of produce from Flagstaff to Albuquerque. I remember the sky being clear, the kind of sharp cold that makes your breath hang like smoke. Route 87 was dead quiet except for the hum of my engine and that faint whistle you get when wind slips through the mirror seams. I'd been driving for hours without seeing another car, just long stretches of scrub and desert rock lit by my high beams. That's when I saw him, just a shadow at first, standing by the mile marker sign. I slowed down because he didn't look right. Most hitchhikers stick out their thumb or wave, but this guy just stood there, hands at his sides, head tilted slightly down. He wore a dark jacket and jeans, no bag, no light, just a thin shape in the glare of my headlights. I should have kept going. Every instinct told me to keep driving. But I've picked up a few people over the years. Runaways, broke travelers, even a priest once. And I've never been the kind of man who could leave someone stranded in the cold. So I pulled over. When he got close enough for the lights to hit his face, I almost wished I hadn't. He was young, maybe mid-20s, with pale skin and black hair that hung wet against his forehead, though it hadn't been raining. His eyes were strange, not wide, not glazed, just unfocused, like he was looking at something behind me. I rolled down the window and said, "You need a lift?" He nodded once, slow, then climbed in without a word. His clothes were dusty, smelled faintly like smoke. For the first few miles, we didn't talk. He just stared out the windshield, hands folded in his lap. I tried making small talk, where you headed, what brings you out here, that kind of thing, but he didn't answer. Finally, I asked, "You got a name?" He turned his head just a little and said, "Eli." That was it. One word. His voice was flat, but it carried this rasp, like he hadn't spoken in days. We drove another 20 minutes in silence before he said something that made the hairs on my arms stand up. "You ever been down this road before?" he asked. I told him, yeah, plenty of times. He nodded slowly, still staring ahead. "You ever notice how it keeps changing?" I frowned. What do you mean? He didn't answer right away. The signs, he said finally. The markers. Sometimes they're not the same when you come back. I tried to laugh it off, said maybe he was tired or mixed up, but he just smiled faintly and whispered, "No one ever leaves this road the same way twice." We passed a gas station around mile 312. But it was dark, boarded up, like it hadn't been open in years. The desert stretched on, the kind of nothingness that swallows sound. That's when the CB radio crackled to life, a burst of static followed by a faint voice. It wasn't anyone I recognized, but it said my name, clear as day. Jack, just that. Then silence. I froze, glanced at the dial to make sure it was even on the right channel. It was. I looked over at Eli. He hadn't moved. Did you hear that? I asked. He nodded. He's calling you. Something about the way he said it, soft, almost sympathetic, sent a cold ripple through my chest. I switched the radio off. We drove in silence for another hour before I noticed the fuel gauge dipping lower than it should have been. I hadn't stopped or idled long enough to burn that much gas. When I checked the clock, it said 3:47 a.m. I could have sworn it had been barely an hour since we left Winslow. The desert around us was pitch black now. No lights, no horizon, no sign of the town we should have hit by then. I told him I needed to pull over to check the map. He didn't say anything, but when I slowed down, he leaned forward and whispered, "Don't stop." Not here. His tone changed completely, urgent, almost panicked. I looked at him, and for the first time I saw something alive in his eyes, something terrified. "What's out there?" I asked. He shook his head. "Not what, where?" The CB hissed again, soft and broken. I turned it off earlier, but it was on now, dial spinning by itself, the speaker crackling with that same faint whisper. "Jack, you missed the turn?" I slammed the radio against the dash. "This thing's busted," I muttered. Eli didn't even look at me. He just said, "It's not the radio." The road felt different after that. The lines were fading, the asphalt darker, smoother, almost new-looking, like we'd rolled into a stretch no one had driven in years. I turned on the high beams and the light fell on something ahead, a sign I'd never seen before. It was crooked, old, shot through with rust, but I could still make out the words, "Nowhere Road. Mile." Eli exhaled sharply, almost like a sob. "Don't stop," he said again. But my curiosity got the better of me. I slowed anyway. The air outside had changed, cooler, thicker, and carrying this faint smell like wet ashes. My skin prickled as the headlights swept across the desert. Everything was too still. No wind, no movement. And then, just for a second, I thought I saw figures standing out there between the rocks. Tall, thin silhouettes, their heads turned toward us. When I blinked, they were gone. I looked at Eli, ready to ask if he saw them too, but his seat was empty. I hit the brakes so hard the truck skidded sideways on the dirt shoulder. The passenger door was wide open, swinging in the cold air. I jumped out, called his name, scanned the desert with my flashlight. Nothing but dust and silence. No footprints, no sign he'd even been there. The only sound was the faint hum of my idling engine. I waited there for maybe 20 minutes, shouting until my throat hurt. Finally, I got back in and drove fast as I could, eyes glued to the road. When I hit the next junction, the highway signs were all wrong. Numbers reversed, letters smeared. It took me another hour to find my way back to the main route. When I reached Winslow at dawn, I went straight to the sheriff's office, told them everything. They sent a deputy out, but when they checked that stretch, there was nothing. No Nowhere Road, no sign, no tracks. They said I must have been tired, maybe fallen asleep at the wheel. I tried to tell them about Eli, but when they searched missing persons records, the only Eli who fit the description had died in a fire near that same area, back in 1979. I stopped driving nights for a while after that. Couldn't shake the feeling that I'd left something unfinished. But 3 weeks later, the company installed dash cams in all the rigs, front and cabin view synced to a GPS log. And that's when I found out I wasn't the only one who heard him. I didn't check the dash cam right away. Part of me didn't want to know. But the company sends footage to dispatch automatically. And when the safety manager, a guy named Ron, called me a few days later, I could tell from his voice something was wrong. "Hey, Jack," he said, hesitant. "You got a minute? There's something weird on your last night route. March 15th. You mind coming in?" I thought it'd be some mechanical issue or maybe a traffic infraction. But when I got there, Ron just pointed to his computer screen and said, "Watch." He played the cabin footage. It started normal. Me driving, hands on the wheel, headlights cutting through the dark. I could hear the hum of the tires, the occasional click of the turn signal. Everything looked just like I remembered, until the timestamp hit 2:13 a.m. The camera flickered once, a brief static flash, and then the passenger door opened. There was no one standing outside, no one visible in the headlights, but the door moved like someone had pulled it open. And then, without a sound, it shut again. Ron paused the video. "You stopped there?" he asked. I nodded. "Yeah, I picked up a hitchhiker. Kid named Eli." Ron looked at me like I'd said something crazy. "Jack, there's nobody there. Look," he replayed it. Empty seat, empty road. Just me, staring straight ahead like I was talking to someone who wasn't there. "You look off," he said quietly, and he was right. The man in the video, me, was pale, twitchy, glancing sideways like I was hearing something. Then came the radio. At 2:42 a.m., the CB burst alive in the recording, just like it had that night. The static hissed, and then that faint voice. "Jack." I could feel the hair on my arms rise. "That's it," I said. "That's what I told you about." But Ron shook his head. "Listen again." He turned up the volume, and the voice came through clearer, layered like more than one person speaking at once. "Jack, you missed the turn." The same words. Only this time, the GPS log on the screen flickered when it played. The coordinates disappeared for 10 full seconds. Blank. When the footage resumed, the timestamp jumped from 2:47 to 4:03 a.m. The truck was still moving, but something had changed. The windshield was fogged, even though the outside temperature read 49 degrees. The highway lines were gone. The horizon was gone. Just black. Where was this? Ron asked. "I don't know," I said truthfully. I thought I was still on 87. Then came the worst part. At 4:12, I slammed the brakes just like I remembered. The camera shook. The truck lurched. The passenger door flew open. I jumped out of the cab and ran off screen. For a few seconds, the camera showed only the empty passenger seat, the dashboard lights flickering faintly. Then from the CB, a voice whispered, "You shouldn't have stopped. It wasn't mine." Ron stopped the playback. "That's not you?" he asked. I shook my head. My throat felt dry. "No." He leaned back in his chair. "Jack, this is impossible. The file wasn't uploaded until 2 days after you returned. The camera's timestamp resets when there's no signal, but the GPS was active the whole time." I didn't understand half of what he said. I just knew that whatever was on that recording wasn't supposed to exist. He wanted to show the footage to corporate, but I told him to delete it. He agreed, though I could tell he didn't. A week later, he stopped answering calls. Another driver told me Ron had quit suddenly, moved out of state. I figured that was that. Until one night, a few weeks later, I started hearing the voice again. It began soft on the radio when no one else was broadcasting. Just a low hiss like wind over sand, then a whisper, "Jack." I turned it off, pulled over, sat in silence. But then my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. It was an audio file, 13 seconds long. I opened it without thinking, and what I heard made my stomach twist. My own voice, panting, desperate, saying, "Eli, where are you?" Followed by another voice overlapping mine, answering calmly, "Right here." I smashed the phone against the dashboard. That same night, another trucker from our company, Carl Simmons, took the same route. He called me the next morning, shaken. "Hey Jack," he said, "did you ever see that old Nowhere Road sign out by Winslow?" I froze. "You saw it?" I asked. "Yeah," he said. "Rusty old thing. Thought it was some ghost town or something." "Why?" I didn't tell him the truth. Just said, "Stay off that stretch." He laughed it off. 2 days later, his rig was found idling by the side of the highway. Empty, door open, engine running. They never found him. I told the sheriff again. He just sighed, said that whole section's been reworked. No Nowhere Road exists. But when they checked Carl's dash cam, the footage had the same distortion mine did. The coordinates blinked out for 10 seconds. And right after that, the cabin mic picked up a whisper, clear this time. "You missed the turn." After that, I quit long haul for good. Sold the rig, got a small job managing warehouse deliveries. Still drive a little, but only in daylight. Sometimes, though, when I'm on an empty stretch of asphalt, I swear I catch a glimpse of something in the mirrors. Someone standing by the road, thumb out, head bowed. And for a second the radio hums with static and I hear that voice again. Jack, last month I bought a new dash cam. Different brand, different model. Haven't even used it yet. But 2 nights ago I plugged it in to test it, just to make sure it worked. When I turned it on, it automatically connected to my old account and downloaded saved recordings from the cloud. Only one file showed up. Dated last week. I hadn't driven anywhere that night. The video starts the same way as before, dark highway, engine hum, my hands on the wheel. But I wasn't in the cab when it was recorded. The camera pans slowly to the passenger seat. Someone's sitting there. It's Eli. He turns toward the camera, his face pale in the glow, and smiles. Then he leans close, his voice soft, deliberate like he's whispering right into my ear. You shouldn't have stopped, Jack. Now it's your road. The screen goes black after that. I unplugged the camera and threw it into the desert behind my house. But sometimes late at night I hear the faint crackle of a CB through my walls. A voice whispering under the static, calm and patient, waiting for me to drive again. My name's Kyle, and a few years ago I used to call myself an urban explorer, though there's nothing urban about crawling into old, half-collapsed tunnels in the middle of the Arizona desert. It was mostly for YouTube, if I'm honest. People love that stuff. Forgotten America, abandoned ghost towns, lost mines. We weren't pros, just a bunch of idiots with headlamps, cameras, and a taste for things we didn't understand. The channel wasn't even big. A few thousand subscribers, mostly fellow explorers and weirdos who liked watching near-death experiences. But we thought we were documenting history. I can see now we were poking a sleeping thing. Jerome, Arizona, that was our next big feature. A former copper mining town built into the side of a mountain. It's touristy now, full of art shops and wine bars. But if you head away from the polished streets and follow the old trails, you'll find ruins, rusted elevator shafts, sunken air vents, wooden supports black with age. The Dry Creek mine wasn't on any map. We found it by accident, using a satellite overlay from an old geological survey, a collapsed entryway in the side of a canyon wall, barely visible under thorn bushes. We planned to go in at night, less chance of getting caught. Better footage, it was me, my best friend Eric, and a couple named Jenna and Rob. We'd done a dozen of these trips together, usually abandoned hotels or irrigation tunnels. But this one felt different the second we parked. The desert was dead quiet. No crickets, no wind, not even the usual hum of distant cars, just a low, dry heat, and the sound of gravel crunching under our boots. The mine mouth looked like a black wound in the rock. Someone had nailed a wooden board over it decades ago. Keep out, unsafe. The letters barely visible through layers of dust. Eric pried it loose with a crowbar while I filmed, the beam of my flashlight catching the hollow dark beyond. Inside, the air was cold, stale, the kind of cold that eats through your clothes. The first few 100 feet were just narrow tunnels, wood beams sagging under their own weight, old metal rails half buried in dirt. We cracked jokes to keep the nerves off, Jenna humming the Indiana Jones theme, Eric saying this was where we'd find a real lost city. The deeper we went, the less it felt like a place humans had made. The rock walls began to sweat, the air grew thicker and our lights seemed to dim faster than usual. About 30 minutes in, we found the first sign that something wasn't right. Eric noticed it first, a boot print in the dust, perfectly fresh. Not ours, too deep, too sharp. Someone's been down here, he said. Recently, I shrugged, tried to play it off. Could be another explorer. But inside my stomach twisted. We were miles from any main road. The mine was sealed until we broke it open. There shouldn't have been anyone, we pressed on anyway, stupid. The tunnel forked and we went left, marking the wall with chalk. The floor sloped downward. Soon we were crawling, ducking under rotted beams, our knees scraping against cold stone. Then the tunnel opened into a chamber, wide, circular, lined with broken tools, bits of old machinery, and a massive vertical shaft in the center. We could see the remnants of a wooden lift, cables still dangling into the dark below. I dropped a small rock, waited for the sound. It never came. That's when we heard it. A metallic clank echoing from deep down the shaft like something shifting far below. Jenna laughed nervously. Probably a rock, she said. But Eric turned off his light, and in the silence that followed, we all heard it again. A slow, deliberate scrape. Metal on metal, we decided to head back. But the moment we turned around, the air changed. It's hard to explain, but it felt charged, like before a storm. The walls seemed to breathe, and then faintly we heard something else. Whispering. Not words exactly, more like breathing mixed with voices. Jenna grabbed my arm so hard her nails dug into my skin. "It's the wind," I whispered. But she shook her head. "There's no wind down here." We started moving faster, our lights flickering as if something was draining them. The whispering grew louder, coming from behind us. Eric called out, "Hello? Who's there?" His voice echoing down the corridor. The sound stopped instantly. Dead silence. Then a single click like a camera shutter. I froze. We hadn't taken any pictures. Rob turned his light toward the sound. For half a second I thought I saw someone. A pale shape just beyond the edge of the beam. A person maybe, standing still, watching. Then it was gone. Panic set in. We half ran, half crawled back through the tunnels, tripping over loose rails and debris. My camera was still rolling, catching only fragments. Beams of light, our breaths, a flash of something moving along the wall. By the time we saw the exit, we were gasping. The air outside hit like a slap, hot and dry. We didn't speak for a while, just packed up and drove. It wasn't until later, when I reviewed the footage, that I noticed the faces. They weren't obvious. You had to pause at the right frame. But they were there. In the corners of the tunnel, in the black between the beams. Pale, hollow eyes watching. And something else. A shape crouched behind us in the chamber, too tall to be human. Eric swore the camera glitched. But I knew what I saw. 2 days later, he texted me. I went back. I called him furious. He didn't answer. Then, about an hour later, he sent one more message. "It's not empty, Kyle. They're still down there." That was the last time anyone heard from him. I didn't want to go back. God knows I didn't. But 3 days after Eric's message, his sister called me. She said he hadn't come home, hadn't answered texts, nothing. His car was found parked by Dry Creek Canyon, doors locked, keys still in the ignition. They figured maybe he'd gone hiking and got lost. But I knew better. I tried to tell myself he'd just gone off for footage. Maybe camping nearby, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw that last frame from my camera. The tall shape crouched in the dark. The way its eyes seemed to glint like wet stone. I drove out to Jerome that night around midnight. The town looked dead, just a few dim porch lights glowing in the hills. The road to Dry Creek is a narrow ribbon of gravel that winds through nothing but yucca and dust. When I parked at the canyon rim, I could see his car half covered in dirt, like it had been sitting there for days. I grabbed my gear, flashlight, camera, a crowbar, and started toward the mine. The desert was silent again, the same dead quiet as before. When I reached the entrance, the board we'd pried off was gone. In its place was a new one, nailed tight, spray-painted this time with the word "Stay" in thick red letters. My gut told me to turn around, but I didn't. I pried it loose, stepped inside, and the air swallowed me whole. It felt colder than last time. Every sound, my breath, my boots, the clink of my flashlight, echoed too long, like the tunnel itself was listening. The walls seemed tighter, the air heavier, as if the mine didn't want me there. I followed the chalk marks we'd left, though most had smeared away, like something had brushed against them. Halfway down, I found Eric's backpack. It was leaning against the wall, unzipped. His camera lay beside it, screen cracked, still faintly blinking red. I pressed play. The video showed him walking, his voice low and tense. "Something's moving down here," he said. "I can hear them talking, but I can't see where it's coming from." Then came that same scraping sound we'd heard before, followed by the lights swinging wildly, catching glimpses of the tunnel. The last thing he said was, "It's not empty," before the video cut to static. I stuffed the camera into my jacket and kept moving. The deeper I went, the more wrong everything felt. The tunnels looked different. Some weren't even there last time. The walls shimmered like wet stone, and there was this faint humming like power lines in the distance, only lower, deeper. Then I found footprints again. Dozens this time, some human, some not. The human ones ended near the main shaft, but the others, long, narrow, dragging, continued around the edge. My flashlight flickered. I smacked it, and for a moment in the stutter of light I saw movement below. Something was climbing the shaft wall, slow, deliberate, like it had more than 2 hands. I backed up, heart hammering. The air shifted. I swear I heard breathing, close enough to fog my light. Then came a voice, Eric's voice. "Kyle." It echoed through the chamber, stretched and wrong, like something imitating him. "You came back." I spun around. The beam caught something standing halfway down the tunnel. It was wearing Eric's jacket. Same boots. But the head wasn't right. Too long, too smooth, like the skin had been pulled tight over something that wasn't bone. It tilted its head in that slow, jerky way that makes your brain scream that something's off. Then it smiled. Not a human smile. Too wide, too calm. I ran. I didn't care about the camera. Didn't care about the noise. The whispering started again, chasing me through the dark. Not from behind, but from the walls themselves. 100 voices murmuring, "Stay, stay." I felt something grab my sleeve, cold and leathery. I tore free, scrambled toward the surface, half blind from tears and dust. When I burst out into the open air, dawn was breaking. The desert light hit like a flood, and I collapsed by the rocks, gasping. I looked back once, and I swear for a second I saw hands. Dozens of pale, thin hands pressing against the inside of the tunnel mouth, like something was trying to keep from being seen. Then one by one, they pulled back into the dark. I called the sheriff later that morning. Told him where to find Eric's backpack. They went out there, but the deputy said the entrance was sealed. No sign of any tunnel, no footprints, no board. Just a smooth rock wall, like it had never been there. They thought I imagined it. The heat, maybe. Dehydration. But a week later, Jenna texted me a link. Someone had uploaded a new video to our abandoned channel, time-stamped 2 days after I'd gone back. The thumbnail was pitch black with the title Dry Creek Part 2. I didn't click at first, but curiosity got me. I opened it. The footage began inside the tunnel, shaky and dim. The camera turned slowly toward the wall where something had carved words into the rock. They never left. The camera panned down to show a pair of boots. Eric's. Then it turned toward the lens like someone else was holding it now. And for half a second I saw a face. My own. Except it wasn't me. The eyes were too dark, the skin too pale, and when it smiled, the lips cracked like dried clay. Then the feed glitched and cut to black. The video ended there. But the channel's analytics say it keeps getting views. Hundreds every night. Even though it's unlisted. Sometimes, when I check the comments, I see new ones appear and names I don't recognize. Each posting the same thing over and over. We're still here. And at night, when the wind picks up outside my house, I swear I can hear it. That same low humming from beneath the earth. Like the mind's still breathing. Like it's waiting for me to come back. My name's Sheriff Dan Harlow, and I've been wearing a badge in Pinal County, Arizona for just over 22 years. Most days it's dull work, traffic stops, bar fights, the occasional missing person who usually turns up drunk at a cousin's place in Globe. But every so often, this desert reminds you it doesn't really belong to us. It's ancient, patient, and it watches. You start to feel it out here. The silence, the miles of red rock and dust stretching into forever. I used to think the scariest thing about the desert was how empty it was. Now I know better. It's not empty. It's waiting. It started one night in early August, 3 summers back. The monsoon season had rolled through hard that week. Flash floods, lightning splitting the sky like veins of fire. The air still smelled like wet metal. I was parked outside the diner on Main, finishing a stale cup of coffee when the first call came over dispatch. A woman named Carol Reeves said she'd seen lights out past Superior near the dry lake bed. Blue ones, she said. Moving fast. Real low to the ground. I figured it was just kids with drones or maybe the reflection of storm flashes over the ridge. Told her we'd check it out. By the time I drove out there, it was nearly midnight. The road turned to dirt past the quarry. One of those forgotten routes that looks like it's been cut by hand a century ago. The rain had left deep grooves in the mud, and I had to crawl along in 4-wheel just to keep from sinking. I killed the headlights once I hit the flats. That's when I saw them. At first, I thought they were just lightning balls, the kind you sometimes get after a big storm. Spheres of electric gas rolling over the horizon. But these weren't random. There were 3 of them, pale blue, pulsing in rhythm, gliding above the desert floor maybe 50 feet up. They weren't solid, more like mist or light trapped inside glass. Every few seconds they'd move closer together, then drift apart again, hovering silently over the same patch of ground. I radioed dispatch. Unit 12, I'm at the Superior Flats. You seeing this? But the radio just hissed. Static, soft and crackling, almost like whispering. I thought it was interference until I realized the rhythm of the static matched the pulses of the lights. Like the sound and the sight were connected. Then something happened that made my stomach drop. The light stopped moving, froze midair, and turned toward me. I don't know how to explain that. They didn't have eyes or faces, but I swear I felt them focus. My whole body went cold, the hair on my arms standing straight up. I took a slow breath and reached for the camera in the dash. Before I could lift it, the lights vanished, blinked out like someone had flipped a switch, just gone. The darkness that followed was so thick it felt like ink. I drove back into town, told myself it was lightning or swamp gas or hell. Maybe I was just tired. But the next morning, Carol Reeves called again, said the lights were back, this time over the old mining site by Dry Lake. She said they'd moved closer to the ground, like they were looking for something. That's how she put it. I drove out there again, this time with Deputy Marlin in the passenger seat. Marlin's a kid, 24, good head on his shoulders but green. He'd heard the chatter on the scanner and was buzzing with excitement. Maybe it's some Air Force thing, he said, like testing drones or whatever. I told him maybe, but the Air Force doesn't usually test in abandoned copper pits. We parked near the ridge and walked the rest of the way down. The air was still, heavy, the kind of stillness that presses in on you until you start hearing your own pulse. The ground underfoot was soft from the rain, our boots sinking into layers of clay and dust. Then, about 200 yards out, we saw them again. The same blue orbs gliding low over the ground, maybe 20 feet up. Only this time there was sound. A low hum, faint but steady, like power lines buzzing. The closer we got, the more the air seemed to vibrate, like it was thick with energy. Marlin lifted his flashlight, but the beam bent. I swear to God, bent on away from the light. It was like they were bending space itself. Jesus, he whispered. You seeing that? I was. Then as we watched, the lights began to drift apart, circling something in the dirt. Something buried. The glow illuminated the shape of it. A long, uneven mound half covered by rock and debris. I thought it was just scrap at first, maybe some mining equipment or old piping. But when I stepped closer, I saw it wasn't metal. It was bone. Huge, pale bones, twisted and fused together like they'd melted in heat. Ribs the size of beams, a skull fractured down the center. The desert had half swallowed it. But you could still see the curve of the spine, the sockets where eyes should have been. Not human. Not even close. Marlin froze. What the hell is that? Before I could answer, the lights flickered, once, twice, and the hum spiked so loud it rattled my teeth. The ground beneath the mound trembled, and I swear I saw it shift, like something underneath it moved. We both stumbled back. Then as quickly as it started, everything stopped. The lights winked out, the hum faded, and the night went dead silent again. We hauled out of there fast. When we got back to town, Marlin was shaking so bad he couldn't speak. I wrote up the report, left out the part about bones, told the mayor it was probably kids with flares or maybe a meteor strike. He didn't ask questions, but the next morning the ground at the site was burned. Perfectly circular patches of black, 10 feet wide, still smoking like the earth itself had been branded. That was the first night I realized those lights weren't just floating over the desert. They were digging. The next 2 nights, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those blue lights pulsing behind my eyelids. Rhythmic, steady like a heartbeat. Marlin called in sick, said he wasn't feeling right. His voice on the phone sounded hollow, slow. I told him to rest, but I could hear something in the background. A faint hum like an engine idling far away. I almost asked about it, but he hung up before I could. That morning, I drove back to the site alone. I didn't tell dispatch. Didn't even log the trip. I just had to see it again. Convince myself it was explainable. A trick of light, a heat mirage, something with science behind it. The desert was quiet when I got there, too quiet. Even the birds were gone. The patches of scorched earth were still visible. 4 of them now, perfectly circular, like something had pressed itself into the ground and burned its shape there. Around the biggest one, I found marks. Long, narrow grooves, almost like drag lines leading away from the mound we'd seen. I followed them. They went about 50 yards before stopping abruptly at what looked like a sinkhole. I leaned over the edge, shining my flashlight down. The beam disappeared into nothing. The air coming out was cold. Too cold for the desert. I dropped a small rock inside and listened. It took 4 full seconds before I heard it hit bottom. Something about that hole made my chest tighten. Maybe it was the smell, sharp metallic like ozone mixed with blood. I don't know what made me do it, but I started digging. My shovel hit something solid about 2 feet down, not rock. Smooth, curved. I brushed the dirt away and uncovered more of that pale bone, but this time it wasn't fossilized. It looked fresh. The surface was slick, like it had just come out of something alive. That's when I heard the hum again. Faint at first, then growing louder. Coming from everywhere at once, the air, the ground, even inside my chest. The wind picked up swirling dust in tight spirals. I looked up and saw them. 3 blue lights drifting over the ridge. They weren't far this time. Maybe 50 yards out, moving low, deliberate. I could feel the vibration through my boots like the earth itself was trembling. I backed up slowly toward the truck, trying not to blink. The light stopped above the sinkhole, hovering there in perfect stillness. The hum deepened until I thought my teeth would crack. Then the ground split. It didn't explode or collapse. It peeled like the earth itself was a thin skin being pulled open. Beneath it was light. Not blue this time, but white, blinding, pure. The air turned icy, the kind of cold that hurts to breathe. I dropped to my knees, shielding my face. Through my fingers, I saw movement inside that light. Something was rising. It was hard to see, the glare was too strong. But I caught flashes. Long limbs, slick like wet clay, dozens of jointed arms unfolding from a body that shimmered like heat haze. Its surface rippled with light like it wasn't solid. And the sound, and it wasn't just humming anymore. There were voices in it, thousands of them whispering together, layered into one endless drone. Then, just as suddenly, it stopped. The light blinked out, the hum died, and I was left in silence again, crouched in the dust. The hole was gone. Perfectly flat ground, as if nothing had ever been there. Even the burn marks were fading, the soil turning from black to red right before my eyes. I don't remember the drive back to town. One minute I was staring at that spot. The next I was sitting in my office, hands shaking, watching the sun rise through the blinds. I didn't report it. Who would believe me? The next day, Marlon's sister called. He hadn't shown up anywhere, not at home, not at work. His cruiser was found off the same dirt road by Dry Lake. Engine still running, radio hissing. When I went out there, I found his boots sitting by the roadside. Inside one was a scrap of paper. Just 3 words scrawled in shaky handwriting. "They're under us." After that, the lights started appearing every few nights. People called in from all over the county. Ranchers, truckers, kids heading home from parties. Always the same description. 3 blue orbs, silent, circling something in the desert. The news called it atmospheric plasma, or secret government testing. But I've seen that ground open. I've heard those voices. A month later, the Reeves family, the same folks who first reported the lights, vanished. Their house stood empty. Dinner still on the table, TV still on. No struggle, no blood, just gone. When we searched the property, we found circular burns in the field behind their barn. There are nights I still drive out there, park by the ridge, and watch. Sometimes when the air is clear and the moon is thin, you can see faint blue glows deep under the dirt like stars buried in the ground. They pulse in patterns, slow, steady, almost like breathing. And when the wind dies down completely, you can hear that low hum again, not in your ears, in your chest. It feels like the desert itself is alive, like something vast and ancient is sleeping under the soil, shifting in its dreams. Maybe it's always been there. Maybe the lights weren't visitors at all. Maybe they were warnings. Last week I drove out one final time. I parked in the same spot, stepped out into the quiet. No lights, no sound, just stillness. But as I stood there, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. No text, just a video file. I opened it. The screen showed a view from above the desert like drone footage, except I wasn't recording. The camera panned slowly down toward the flats. 3 blue lights hovered in the distance. Then the shot tilted and I realized the figure standing below, the one they were circling, was me. The video cut to static. I threw the phone out the window. But that night, when I tried to sleep, the hum started again. Not loud, just a faint vibration beneath the floor, pulsing in rhythm with my heartbeat. They're not gone. They're waiting. And I think whatever's buried under Superior isn't sleeping anymore.